Today's video is sponsored by Bright Cellars. Something that I have always found to be important was to find ways to decompress after a very long day. And for a while, my old reliable method of going into my closet and screaming for hours on end worked for a time. It did, however, begin to lose its effectiveness after 8 years, and that is why I am thrilled to announce today's sponsor, Bright Cellars. Now, instead of screaming into the void, I can sit back and enjoy a lovely glass of wine. Now, I know wine isn't a drink for everyone, and I myself was that person, but when I filled out Bright Cellars' personalized questionnaire, I was shocked at the results. All of the bottles that were sent to my house were tastes that I actually enjoyed. No burning, no weird or unpleasant smell, and best of all, the bottles even came with information cards that not only showed me where the wine was made, but also what it was made of and what it pairs perfectly with. Bright Cellars really does their homework with every bottle as well, telling you what the best serving temp is, as well as having a vast amount of bottles to pick from over 80 different wine regions. I personally have been having a glass or two every night for the past week, and it's become my favorite way to combat alcoholism, to kick back and relax. Even if I am not enjoying a full dinner with my glass, I can still experience the lovely taste of Merlots, Pinot Noirs, and Rosés anytime while sitting down for a movie at night or simply lounging back and enjoying some music while reading. Bright Cellars brings luxury wine to your doorstep with ease, and you can all experience this as well. Right now, Bright Cellars is giving my subscribers their first 6-bottle subscription box that is normally over $150 for only $55. Click the link below and simply take their quiz and start enjoying your wine today. Once again, click the link in the description to claim your subscription box for only $55. On the last day of 2010, a small item appeared in the obituary column of page A8 of the Longview News Journal in Longview, Texas. It said that memorial services would be held on Monday, January 3rd, 2011, at First Christian Church on 6th Street in Longview for a woman named Lori Erica Ruff. According to the obituary, Ruff had died on Christmas Eve. She was 41 years old and was born in Scottsdale, Arizona, and was survived by her daughter Jessica and her husband, Blake. The article probably didn't attract much notice at the time. In fact, there was an entry right above Lori's about the death of a much older woman who passed away the day after, and even the obituary right next to Lori's was twice as long as hers. But in hindsight, there actually was something worth paying attention to here. Maybe not what was actually in the obituary, but definitely what was left out. You see, the information about the date of Lori's death and the details of her funeral were all correct, and she really did leave behind a husband and daughter. But everything else in that obituary about Lori herself was a lie, and that was just the way Lori wanted it. In the early 2000s, John Blakely Ruff, known to friends and family simply as Blake, was the son of a prosperous East Texas family. His grandparents had gotten rich off of the Texas oil boom in the 1930s, and Blake had it made from day one. He grew up comfortable, went to college, and began working in telecommunications. Then, his twin brother David started attending Bible study at Northwest Bible Church in Dallas, where he met the woman that he would go on to marry. Blake had always been inclined to follow his brother's lead, so he joined the Bible study too. He was shy, and he didn't talk much, but he was kind and took people at their word. So it comes as no shocker that he was very easy to like. Soon enough, he met a tall, pretty brunette who introduced herself as Lori Kennedy, and they began dating. Or, in the church's eyes, courting. Lori was smart, fond of animals, and was deeply devoted to her Christian faith. And as caring and friendly as Lori was, where she could seemingly have a conversation with anyone, no matter the topic, there was something, however, that Lori was very quick to avoid any attention at all on the one thing that she didn't want to discuss, that being her past Blake's mother, Nancy, once spent an entire afternoon trying to get Lori to open up about who she had been and what she had done before she met Blake, and she didn't get far. According to Lori, her parents were both dead and she had no living siblings, aunts, or uncles. She told Blake that she destroyed all of the old photos of her family because she'd had a bad life. And Blake never asked her what was so bad about it. All he seemed to care about was that Lori was here now and they were together. When Blake and Lori got engaged, Nancy wanted to put an announcement of it in the local paper, but Lori absolutely refused to allow it. "We can't do things like that," she would say, although it was never clear who the "we" Lori could have been referring to. Less than a year after they had met at Bible study, Blake and Lori slipped away and got a preacher to marry them in a little church outside of Dallas. The preacher was the only guest at that wedding. Blake and Lori eventually bought a house in Leonard, Texas, a town with less than 2,000 residents and more than 100 miles away from the Ruff family home in Longview. Settling into their new home, Blake went out of his way to be friendly to their new neighbors on the one-lane road where they lived. Lori, however, did not. She would be seen walking the perimeter of the property at night, avoiding contact with literally anyone else. She worked as a marketing consultant and a mystery shopper, testing out stores and products and writing reviews. More than anything else, though, Lori wanted to be a mom. After what Blake later described as a lot of trying, several miscarriages, and fertility treatments, she finally gave birth to a baby girl in the summer of 2008. Unsurprisingly, Lori was just as possessive and private about her daughter as she was about anything else. If the baby tried to chew on something, Lori would grab it out of her mouth. She never let her mother-in-law babysit or even left her alone in the room with her daughter, which did make things very awkward, being that Nancy at that point had 9 grandchildren. And as a shock to nobody, Nancy knew how not to only raise kids, but also how to help with things that new parents might not know, such as how to hold their newborn. And yet, whenever help was offered to Lori, she rejected any and all offers of Nancy's help. As private as Lori was with her own life, she seemed to be the complete opposite with Blake's family. She became almost obsessed with the Ruff family history, spending hours mapping out their genealogy and actually tracking down any and all family information. But when the other women in the family gathered in the kitchen during visits to talk and cook and just spend time together, Lori never seemed to want to join them, and she never explained why, not even to Blake. Blake later told a journalist years later, "I'm assuming something really tragic must have happened. Something awful is what it appears to me." Between 2008 and 2010, Lori began to unravel. She withdrew even more from contact with the family, refusing to let her daughter see her grandparents, aunts, uncles, or even cousins. She found faults with everything that they did and never forgot even the smallest slights. Finally, Blake decided that he had had enough, and in the summer of 2010, he moved back in with his parents. Then he filed for divorce. And that is when Lori really began to fall apart. A neighbor invited her to counseling sessions at his church, where she talked in circles for hours, obsessing over her relationship with Blake. Blake actually came to those counseling sessions as well, and he even brought his brother David along for support. But in the end, they couldn't find a way to save their marriage. In the autumn of 2010, Lori began sending threatening emails to the Ruffs. What was even more concerning was reports from the neighbors, who would describe Lori and her young daughter as frighteningly thin. There was even a disturbance during a custody exchange, and right after that, the Ruffs noticed that one of their house keys had gone missing. And from there, the paranoia only grew. Nancy described hearing the squeak of their backyard gate one morning right before Christmas, when no one was supposed to be out there. The Ruffs got a judge to issue a cease and desist order to Lori, assuming she was the one responsible for these odd occurrences. And that cease and desist letter culminated to the events that happened on December 24th, 2010. Early in the morning, Blake's father, John, went to the garage to get the morning paper. As the door began rolling up, he saw a black Chevy Tahoe idling in the driveway. The Tahoe was easily recognizable as Lori's car. John scrambled back inside and called the police. And when police arrived, they found Lori's body in the Tahoe. She had died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. The car contained an 11-page letter addressed to my wonderful husband and another letter addressed to her daughter to be opened on the girl's 18th birthday. The police report describes the contents of those letters as ramblings from a clearly disturbed person. After the funeral, members of the family drove out to Leonard to dig through the little house and find out what they could about Lori and what she had been hiding for all of those years. They found stacks of dirty dishes and laundry, soiled linens in the baby's bed, and bags of shredded documents. And they found pages and pages of Lori's scrawled notes. It appeared that she would write on whatever was handy, and if there was no blank paper available, she'd simply write over what she had already written. As one family member stated, it was a roadmap to a disintegrating mind. In the closet was a strongbox which for some reason was labeled crafts. In that strongbox, they found a court document from 1988. Someone had changed her name to Lori Erika Kennedy. Before that, she'd been Becky Sue Turner. And finally, it appeared to the family that they had found the key that would unlock Lori or Becky's past. It almost seemed too good to be true. And unfortunately, it was. That was because Becky Sue Turner was dead. But she hadn't died in a driveway in 2010. She'd been born in Bakersfield, California in 1969 and died in a house fire in Washington in 1971. Lori, or whoever she had been, was an identity thief, a walking mystery. A private investigator managed to find bits and pieces of Lori's trail. She'd gotten hold of Becky Sue's California birth certificate in June of 1988, then used it to apply for a state ID card in Idaho. She'd appeared in Dallas in July of 1988 to change her name to Lori Erika Kennedy. She applied for and got a social security number and, in 1989, a Texas driver's license. She qualified for a GED in 1990 and enrolled in a community college. And in 1997, she graduated from the University of Texas at Arlington with a degree in business administration. There were other clues in the strongbox, letters of references from an employer and a landlord who had turned out to not even exist. There was also scribbled contact information for an attorney named Ben Perkins, who had never even heard of or met Lori. Also in the strongbox was a note referencing the North Hollywood police with the words 402 months written on it. There was also information on a mailbox in Boulder City, Nevada that forwarded mail to Dallas under Lori's name. Another thing that was discovered in the lockbox was paperwork that detailed that Lori had gotten breast implants, something that both Blake and essentially everyone else was completely unaware of. But even with all of that information found in that lockbox, none of those clues led anywhere. Becky Sue's surviving family members couldn't help either, as they didn't recognize any photos of Lori. The mystery of who Lori was continued for another 3 years. 3 years filled with doubt, anger, sadness, confusion, and dead ends. In 2013, the Seattle Times ran a feature story on Lori's case. The story profiled a man named Joe Velling, a former Social Security Administration investigator who was looking into the mystery of Lori Erika Ruff in his retirement. Online sleuths picked up the trail and ran with it. They compared Lori's photos to thousands of photos of missing women. They came up with theory after theory and thought that maybe Lori was on the run from the law. Maybe she had escaped an abusive partner. Maybe she had grown up in a cult. None of it, however, connected to the evidence. None of it could be proven. And that is where Colleen Fitzpatrick came in. Colleen Fitzpatrick is one of the pioneers of forensic genealogy. She literally wrote the book on it. If you watch true crime media, you have probably heard her name. She's up there with the likes of John Douglas. And Fitzpatrick had a suggestion for Joe Velling and the Ruff family. Test the DNA of Lori and Blake's daughter and build out a family tree for Jessica until they found a missing woman who could have been Lori. The search turned up a first cousin named Michael Cassidy. Just a name though, and no location. The problem with just having a name is that there are thousands of Michael Cassidys alone in the United States. So Fitzpatrick kept looking. For years, she would periodically check back in on various websites as more people tested their DNA and uploaded their results to comparison sites like GEDmatch or GED Match. And finally, all of that patience paid off when a third cousin appeared. That was enough to build a family tree all the way back to an Irish great-great-grandfather born in 1848. And from there, Fitzpatrick was able to find the right Michael Cassidy who lived near Philadelphia. One of his aunts was Lori's mother. Velling flew to Philadelphia and tracked down one of Michael Cassidy's female relatives at her workplace. He laid out a collection of photos of Lori, ending with her driver's license, and as shock turned to realization, the woman who stood over dozens of pictures and documents revolving around this mysterious woman uttered the words, "My God, that's Kimberly." From there, the story completely unfolded. Lori's birth name had been Kimberly McLean. Her mother, Deanne, was 80 years old when she found out her daughter, who had been missing for 30 years, was dead. Kimberly had been born in 1968. She'd grown up in the Philadelphia suburbs alongside her sister. Deanne had been a stay-at-home mom and married to a James McLean, a carpenter and volunteer firefighter. No one reported any serious problems in Kimberly's childhood until her parents divorced when she was a teenager. After the divorce, Deanne remarried and moved with the girls to Wyncote, Pennsylvania. Kimberly found herself going to a new school, living in a new house, with a new stepfather and new rules. And, unsurprisingly, she didn't like it. In 1986, when she was 18 years old, she moved to King of Prussia, Pennsylvania, and told her mother to not come looking for her. And then, as far as they knew, she vanished. She moved across the country, changed her name twice, and took on a completely different life. One that ended in the Ruff driveway on Christmas Eve, 2010. The big question is why? Because no one seems to know why Kimberly McLean walked away from her life. People who knew her have suggested that she might have ADHD or Tourette syndrome or even an obsessive compulsive disorder. She could have had a secret lover, or she could have been being abused and was unable to tell anyone. Hell, she could have simply wanted a new life. But ultimately, the only one who does know why she did what she did was Kimberly. It is clear that something was going on inside of her, but we will probably never know what it was. All we know for sure is that her daughter will grow up without her biological mother, and the people who knew and loved her will go on living without any answers. From her actions before her death, how she was obsessed with the Ruff family history, the distance that she kept from everyone, her privacy and distrust for anyone around her daughter, leads me to think that Kimberly was definitely traumatized by something in her past. And while, yeah, we may never know what that trauma was, I feel sorry for her. She was clearly someone who was battling with something that nobody should have to deal with alone. And even though she had numerous options to get help and had a support system around her, that doesn't always mean that problems will magically get fixed overnight, if ever. It does make you wonder though, how well do you know the people in your life? Sometime around 10 o'clock in the morning on June 20th, 2001, a NASA engineer named Rusty Yates was at work at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas, when he got a surprise phone call from his wife, Andrea.
You need to come home.
What's going on?
You need to come home. It's time. I did it.
Rusty wasn't sure what it was, but he had a terrible feeling. He asked Andrea to explain.
It's the children.
Which one?
All of them.
Rusty dropped everything and ran. By the time he pulled up to their small Spanish-style home at the corner of Beachcomber and Sea Lark in the Clear Lake neighborhood of Houston, the house was already surrounded by police cars and ambulances. The police wouldn't let Rusty in, so he waited with his forehead pressed against a brick wall. When he couldn't hold still any longer, he began pacing outside of the house, peering in the windows, and at one point screaming through the back door, "How could you do this?" Eventually, police led Andrea out in handcuffs. Her stringy brown hair and striped t-shirt were soaked with water. Rusty collapsed on the lawn in a fetal position, pounding the grass with his fist in grief and rage. In the master bedroom at the back of the house, 4 small bodies lay under a sheet on a double bed. The children were face up, fully clothed, and soaking wet, with their eyes wide open. The smallest one, a baby just 6 months old, lay in the arms of her 5-year-old brother. In the bathroom, a 7-year-old boy drifted, face down in a bathtub full of water, beneath a thin layer of feces and vomit floating on the surface. His eyes, while open, were lifeless. Andrea had called 911 herself. When the police arrived, she told them calmly that she'd murdered her children and expected to be punished. She sat quietly in the back of a squad car as curious neighbors gathered around her house and medical personnel checked the bodies of her children for any sign of life. Anyone who looked at the crime scene could see what had happened, but what no one understood, not even Andrea herself, was why. Andrea Yates was born Andrea Pia Kennedy in Houston in 1964. She was the youngest of 5 children. Her mother was an immigrant from Germany, and her father was the son of immigrants from Ireland. There isn't exactly much known about her childhood, but her friends later reported that she suffered from depression as early as her teenage years, and that she also struggled with bulimia. And by the time that she was 17, she had already spoken to at least one friend about suicide. Despite her troubles, Andrea excelled in high school. She was the captain of the swim team, valedictorian, and a member of the National Honor Society. She went on to study nursing and graduated from the University of Texas Health and Science Center in Houston. After graduation, Andrea worked for several years as a registered nurse at a cancer treatment center in Houston. She met Rusty in the summer of 1989, and the two married in 1993. Rusty and Andrea were devout evangelical Christians, and after their wedding, they announced that they were going to have as many children as God would allow. If you've ever heard of the Quiverful movement, you'll probably recognize those words, and if you haven't, here's a short summary. The Quiverful movement is a set of beliefs within conservative Christianity that opposes the use of birth control and encourages its members to have as many children as they physically can. Quiverful beliefs include ideas like women staying home to care for their many children, preferably by homeschooling them to protect them from any outside influence. Now, I'm not going to wade into religion here. Obviously, people are entitled to their own beliefs, and I don't like to point and laugh at people for how they practice their spirituality. That being said, while it is certainly possible for people to be happy and healthy living this way, there are aspects of the Quiverful lifestyle that can make family dysfunction and mental illness a hell of a lot worse. And for Andrea, it made her an essential ticking time bomb. The first child that was born, Noah Jacob, was born in February of 1994. He would be followed by his brother John Samuel in 95, Paul Abraham in 97, and Luke David in 99. After Luke was born, Andrea's depression came roaring back. On June 16, 1999, when Luke was about 4 months old, Rusty found Andrea shaking and chewing on her fingers. The following day, Andrea tried to end her own life by overdosing on pills. She was hospitalized and prescribed antidepressants, but soon after she was released, she found herself holding a knife to her own throat and begging Rusty to let her die. She was again hospitalized, and this time she was prescribed more drugs, including the antipsychotic Haldol. She seemed to improve after that, but in July of 1999, she suffered a nervous breakdown. And by the end of that summer, she would make 2 more suicide attempts and be hospitalized 2 more times. At this point, she was finally diagnosed with postpartum psychosis. If you've been lucky enough never to experience a postpartum psychiatric disorder, the idea that having a baby can somehow break your brain may sound bizarre. In the aftermath of Andrea's arrest, a lot of media coverage focused on her history with postpartum depression and psychosis, usually, and unfortunately, with a skeptical tone. This was the late 90s after all. People assumed that she was just faking or trying to escape punishment by pretending to be mentally ill. But while doctors aren't exactly sure why some people develop a mental illness after giving birth and others don't, they all agree that it does definitely happen. Humans are complicated organisms after all, and growing another human inside of your own body can make dramatic changes to your hormones, immune system, and even your skeleton. The process of giving birth is so hard on a body that for centuries it was the leading cause of death for women. And then, of course, you have a new baby, which means you lose a lot of sleep for months on end while feeding another human from your own body. It's a lot. Any one of those experiences can trigger psychiatric changes, and new parents get them all at once. Andrea had a history of psychiatric problems going back to her teenage years, and now she was going through pregnancy after pregnancy after pregnancy, birth after birth after birth. Andrea's psychiatrist, Dr. Starbranch, met with Rusty and Andrea when they wanted to stop Andrea's medications so she could again get pregnant. However, Dr. Starbranch warned them not to go through with another pregnancy, but they refused to listen. 2 days later, she wrote in her clinical notes,
"Apparently, patient and husband plan to have as many babies as nature will allow. This will surely guarantee future psychotic depression."
Dr. Starbranch discharged Andrea on January 12, 2000. 7 weeks later, Andrea was pregnant with her 5th child, Mary. There are conflicting accounts of who really was behind the decision to have another baby. After the children died, Rusty insisted that he had no idea Andrea's mental state was dangerous, while Andrea's relatives all told a different story. Andrea's brother, Brian, described Rusty saying that all depressed people needed was a swift kick in the pants to motivate them to behave properly. Now, I have my own feelings on that idiotic statement, but the tragic irony here is that Rusty said this the weekend before the drownings. Rusty announced at a family gathering that he would be leaving Andrea alone with the children for an hour each morning and evening to help her become more independent and not rely on Rusty and his mother to care for the children. Andrea's mother said that she reminded Rusty that Andrea had nearly choked baby Mary by trying to feed her solid food. Andrea herself would tell a prison psychiatrist that she told Rusty she was worried about having another child and that Rusty had replied, "The Lord tells us to go forth and multiply. You're a good mother. You can handle more children." Of course, Andrea isn't exactly a reliable narrator and her family aren't exactly neutral observers, so we'll never exactly know who said or did what exactly when. All we do know is that Mary Deborah Yates was born on November 30th, 2000, and she would unfortunately never lived to see her first birthday. On the morning of June 20th, 2001, Rusty left for work, leaving Andrea and the children alone in the house. Rusty's mother, Dora, was scheduled to show up and help Andrea with the kids an hour later. However, in that hour, Andrea would go on to kill all 5 of her children. She waited until Rusty was gone to run the water in the bathtub. She drowned 5-year-old John, then 3-year-old Paul, then 2-year-old Luke, and laid them out on her bed. 6-month-old Mary was next, and her body was still floating in the bathtub when 7-year-old Noah came in to ask what was going on. He saw Mary's body and tried to run, but Andrea caught him, and he met with the same fate. She left him floating in the water and laid Mary in John's arms. Then she called 911 and asked over and over for a police officer without explaining why. Once the police were on their way, she called Rusty, which leads us to how this tragic story began. At the trial, Andrea pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. Under Texas law, an insanity defense can only be accepted if the defendant did not know right from wrong at the time of the offense. The jury rejected Andrea's insanity defense, and she was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. That conviction, however, was overturned on appeal after it was revealed that Dr. Park Dietz, a psychiatrist hired by the prosecution, had given a false testimony. Dietz had claimed that an episode of Law & Order had aired shortly before the murders in which a woman who drowned her children claimed insanity in order to get out of a murder conviction. At the time, no such episode had actually existed, and Andrea got a new trial and again pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. This time, the jury sided with her and she was remanded to a psychiatric facility. And, as of the writing of this video, she is still being held at Kerrville State Hospital in Kerrville, Texas. After the trials, Rusty seemed to blame everyone but himself for the deaths of his children. He accused Andrea's doctor of not taking her condition seriously, which is fucking laughable given his advice on how you could, and I am doing air quotes here, fix depression. Her health insurer for refusing to pay for adequate care, her antidepressants for triggering her psychosis. He blamed everyone but himself. And while I understand that this man went through something that no parent should ever have to go through, but what I am saying is that there were problems incredibly evident before any of this occurred, and Rusty seemed to completely ignore those concerns. Rusty divorced Andrea in 2005 and remarried a year later. His second wife divorced him in 2015. The closest anyone's ever gotten to an explanation of what was going through Andrea's mind was something that she said to a prison psychiatrist years ago. What was said was equal parts eerie and sad. She told the psychiatrist that she had thought about killing her children for 2 years because her sons were developing in a way that she considered wrong. She was quoted as saying,
"It was the 7th deadly sin. My children weren't righteous, they stumbled because I was evil. The way I was raising them, they could never be saved. They were doomed to perish in the fires of hell."
Andrea was battling her own thoughts to attack her own children, to in a way save them since she felt as though she would be the reason that they would be evil. Words spoken from a cracked mind. A woman who had struggled openly with her depression and seemingly all of her pleas fell on deaf ears. While Andrea acted alone and committed an act that most people would not even fathom doing, it shines a light on a topic that nobody wants to talk about or even notice. Something that can simply be brushed under the rug and covered up with pills, religion, and expectation.
Andrea, can you tell me your full and complete name?
Andrea Yates.
How old are you?
36.
And what's your home address?
942 Beachcomber, Houston, Texas 77062.
Okay. And you and I have been talking for a while, right?
Yes.
You understand your rights?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to read them to you again for the purposes of this recording, okay?
Okay.
And you have a right to remain silent, not to make any statement at all, and that any statement you make may be used against you and probably will be used against you at your trial. Do you understand that?
Yes.
Any statement you make may be used as evidence against you in court. Do you understand that?
Yes.
You have a right to have a lawyer present to advise you prior to and during any questioning. Do you understand that?
Yes.
If you are unable to employ a lawyer, you have a right to have a lawyer appointed to advise you prior to and during any questioning. Do you understand that?
Yes.
And you have a right to terminate this interview at any time. Do you understand that?
Yes.
Okay. You've been treated for depression, is that right?
Yes.
And who's your current doctor?
Dr. Said,
And the last time you saw him?
two days ago.
Okay. This morning, what time is it that you got out of bed this morning?
About 8:10.
Okay. And who in your household was awake at that time?
My husband, Mary, Luke, and Paul.
Okay. And what time does Rusty leave for work?
He left about 9.
And by the time Rusty left, were all your children awake at that time?
Yes.
Okay. What was going on in the household at that time? Were they eating breakfast?
Yes.
Or what?
Yes.
What were they having?
Cereal.
Is that what you had as well?
Yes.
And Rusty left. You filled the bathtub with water, is that correct?
Yes.
And how many bathtubs are in your home?
1.
Okay. So it's just the master bath, I guess you would call it.
Yes.
Okay, is it a regular sized bathtub or is it a big one?
Regular size.
How far did you fill it?
About 3 inches from the top.
About 3 inches from the top, huh? After you drew the bath water, what was your intent? What were you about to do?
Drown the children.